Hi everyone. So in this webinar, we are going to take a look on a basic overview about the product Gold BI and what is Docker and what is Docker Compose and the difference between Docker and the Docker Compose and what is the benefit of choosing the Docker platform to deploy an application and how can we deploy Bolt BI in the Docker platform within a minute. And at last, we are going to see the summary about what we have seen in this webinar. So let's take a look. What is Bolt BI? So Bolt BI is a tool which is used to create and share the interactive analytical dashboards with the users that you have in your accounts. And it allows you to connect your data and you can transform your data based on your needs and you can visualize them in the dashboards. And also we allow you to integrate various modules in Bolt BI like dashboards, designers, the widgets, and also the pinboards too into your applications or the websites and even in the web pages. And also we deploy Bolt BI in two versions. One is it could be our own cloud, which is completely managed by Syncfusion. And the other type is where you can host in your own servers instead of our Syncfusion cloud. So when we talk about like on-premise servers where you can host it, you can deploy either in Windows, Linux, Kubernetes, Azure, or even in Docker. So in this session, we are going to take a look on how to deploy Bolt BI in the Docker platform. Now, what is Docker? So Docker is an open platform used to develop and ship and run the applications, which is completely maintained in an isolated environment because it allows you to separate your applications from your entire infrastructure, where the containers are actually lightweight and it contains everything that needed to run the application. So you don't need to rely on what's installed on the host. For example, consider you have an application already running in your machine and it needs like a .NET Core with a version of 6.7, for example. And if you're trying to work with another application which has the conflict of .NET Core version and which is maybe higher or below to that version. So in this case, you cannot go for another machine in order to make this conflicts to be resolved. So in this case, you can go for the Docker because everything is maintained as a separate container. So whatever the applications and the dependencies that you need, everything will be maintained in a separate container. So even if you have another version of the same platform, like a .NET Core or whatever it can be, it doesn't affect the other applications. That's the Docker application here. And let's see what is Docker Compose. So Docker Compose is a tool that helps you to define and share the multi-container applications. And here you can create a YAML file and define the services with a single command, like whatever the commands that you want to run with the application, you can define in this YAML file and it will automatically control everything, whether if you want to make the service to be up or to be down. So everything will become calculated within this YAML file. So now let's take a look on what is the benefit of using the Docker to deploy an application. So we have various advantages in using the Docker. Let me make some perspectives here. So first one is like flexible resource sharing. As I said earlier, it doesn't rely on what type of applications or what type of dependencies that you have in your host. It doesn't mean that you can have a lot of different versions of the same softwares or the applications, and wherever you want, we can deploy it because everything is maintained in a separate containers and the scalability and the fast deployment because everything is maintained in a separate way. So the security is also better and also migrating of applications from like the development to the staging because everything is in a different container. So that is also very easy to migrate and move and maintain your applications. Now let's take a look on difference between Docker and the Docker Compose because Docker is a command which is like a run command and it completely works on the command line based. But Docker Compose reads the configuration, which means the commands that you entered into the YAML file, and it will read from there and the commands will be executed, which is something like a silent installation. And the second type of difference is Docker can start only one container at a time, but Docker Compose can run multiple containers at a time. This is a major difference between the Docker and the Docker Compose. Now let's take a look how to deploy Bolt BI on Docker. So first of all, before deploying or taking a steps to deploy Bolt BI, first of all, we need to know what are the prerequisites needed to work with the Bolt BI on the Docker. So let's go to this prerequisites link, which is GitHub. So for this, you can go on to our help link, which is help.boltbi.com. And under the deploying Pool BI, we have a concept of deploying in Docker. And we have mentioned what is the prerequisites in terms of hardware and also in terms of the software. So you can go on to this link, which is the GitHub link, and that helps you to point out what are the steps you need to follow to deploy the Pool BI application. And even here, we have mentioned what are the prerequisites. So our next step is to go with the downloading the Docker Compose file using this command. So this command is also explained in our GitHub link itself. So you can start following the steps from this one. So let's copy this command. So first of all, you need to have a where you need to download the Docker Compose. So create a folder under the drive. Let me open the command prompt. And let's download the Docker Compose file. And it will be downloaded here. So let's see what is inside the Docker Compose file. So this is actually the existing containers. So by default, we have the Bowlby application and its container, like where the Bowlby needs to deploy. So everything is maintained in a separate container. So we have the container names and the image. So everyone knows Docker completely works based on the image tags. So this image tag refers the latest version of the Bowlby application and the port numbers, and you can define the environments here. So what we does in here, to install Bolt BI within a minute, you can go for the silent installation. So we have defined all the basic necessities. For example, Bolt BI needs to configure with an intermediate database. It can be either PostgreSQL or MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server. So sometimes you may feel that I don't have any of these three databases. So do I need to install this additionally to make configuration with Bolt BI? Or instead of PostgreSQL, I have MySQL. So can I work with it? Yeah, in this case, you can make the changes in this Docker Compose file. So in case if you don't have any databases, you don't need to worry on that because Docker Compose will take care of installing the PostgreSQL and setting up the username and password to it. And this is the username and password for the account, which is deploying in Postgres. So and also if you want to maintain the volumes, the Postgres and its container, so everything you can track from here itself. So now let me replace with the Docker Compose file. So our next step is to replace the bold BA unlock key in the Docker Compose file. So now let's go to the link. So here they have mentioned how to get the unlock key using this link. Now you can go on to the boldbi.com page and just sign in with your account, and you could see whatever the installations that you have. Either it can be on-premise or in cloud. So you can get the unlock key under this page. So you can get that and you can replace it in the unblock key spaces. So you can replace it here. So as of now, I have an existing unlock key. So let me replace it with that file. So I have replaced it. Now let's go with the next step. So now our next step is to start the containers of the Postgres and Bolt BI using the command, because as we've seen into this Docker Compose file, Postgres has a separate container and Bolt BI has a separate container. So we need to start this container and we can make the applications to the app. So now let's go on to the command prompt. So just copy the command from the help link. So now the containers are created and it has been started. So if you want to see difference, you could see there is a container named Docker and we are running two applications and two containers here. Now let's go with the next step, which is to get the logs. So when you run the logs, you can get the details of like where the application has been running over the port number. So you can go on to this and just paste the command here, and the Polby applications will be continued to work with a silent installation, like a creating of Postgres and deploying the applications, configuring the intermediate database, and setting up the admin accounts and the usernames to log it. So everything is going on to this section. So you can find the comments, Docker Compose logs at Bolt BI. So once done, you can launch the application in the browser. So let's wait until the Bolt BI completes. So it's just take within a minute to deploy the Bolt BI application in the Docker. And the same steps were also involved in our help link as well. So you could see along with our screenshots, like what are the commands you need to do and how can be pointed here. So then maybe the command prompt. So, so it was completely working on here. So it's downloading. And once done, we can refresh this page and you could see the application has been registered. Yeah, now you could see that Bolbay is ready to use now, and this is the localhost with port number. So let's refresh this page, and you could see the creation of intermediate database or configuration of this, and the admin account and the user credentials. So everything is automatically setting up behind the application, and you will be just getting the dashboard space to work, which is the landing page of the application. So the site is creating here, which is we call it as tenant. Now, this is the page where you can work with your dashboards and connecting your data sources. So this is how you can deploy Bolt via in Docker within a minute. And our next concept will be like, in case instead of Postgres, like installing the Postgres as a new one, I already have a PostgreSQL database, or I already have a MySQL or Microsoft SQL, which is actually supported in Bolt BI. So can I make use of the existing databases? Yes, that's actually possible. So you can go on to the GitHub links and you could see an option like how to deploy Bolt BI using the existing DBs. You can find the details from this link, and also let me explain how to do it. So instead of this detail, this is actually the configuration which is set by Bolt BI by default in order to download the PostgreSQL if you doesn't have. In case if you have the existing databases, you can replace it with your details, whatever the database that you have. And also we have explained what is the format to do it in this GitHub link itself. Like if you're using a Microsoft SQL Server or MySQL or Postgres, how to define the code numbers and the username and credentials. So everything is mentioned here. And once done, then you can make the container to the app, and Bolt BI will be launched and the tenant will be created with the configuration that you made. For example, if it is MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server or your existing Postgres, it will be launched with that tenant. So that's the purpose of like how can you use the existing database. And one more thing we can say, like instead of making the silent installation, can I configure the setup manually? Like instead of this, shall I choose the intermediate database from the user interface level and configuring the admin accounts and the user level? So everything, can I make it in a manual way? Yes, that is also possible. So you can go on to the GitHub links and you can go on to the second tab here, and we have explained how to do that each and everything. So in this case, you can remove all these cases, like what is the database type and the user credentials. So you can remove this and just left the app URL alone. So once you define the app URL, and even we have mentioned what is the format to define the app URL. So once you're done, then when you launch the applications, I mean, like when you start up the containers, then this will be your next page to that. So here you need to activate the account and you need to configure user credentials and like setting up intermediate database and the user details. And then it will allow you to work with the dashboards and the data sources. So this is how you can make the launching applications with the manual configuration. And the next type of question is, can I use my host path as a persistent value? Yes, that is also possible in Bolt BI. So actually app data is a folder which is very important in Bolt BI. By default, we have it in the location where Bolt BI is installed. In case if you want to down the containers, or if I'm going to remove the containers, at that time the entire app data will be removed. But in your case, for example, I don't want to remove the app data folder in case even if I remove the containers. So in case if I'm coming up with again an installation, I can reuse the same existing values that I had already. So in this case, what can you do in Sense? Instead of going with the default values, you can define your local drives with the value sections. Like what is this location that you have to define? For example, I'm just going with this specific location, like instead of saying fusion, let me go with like a D drive and like app data, something like that. You can define your own values. That is also possible. So that can be done with this volume sections here. And I have also attached to the GitHub reference links and also the help notes. And in terms of upgrading, for example, I have said that this means when you use this image tag, this will get the latest version of the Gold BI. For example, I want to download with the specific version of Gold BI, like version 6.3 or like a 5.8. Then you can go to the image tags. So that is actually there. Let me open that. So using this is actually a public URL. So from this, you can get the tags based on that versions. And this is all about like how can you deploy Boulder BI in the Docker. So overall in this webinar, we have seen what is Boulder BI, an overview of the Docker and the Docker Compose and the difference between it, and also the benefits of using the Docker to deploy an application. And how can we deploy Boulder BI in Docker with some additional details like making use of your existing database or the persistent volume to use here, or how can I set up it in a manual. So that's all for the webinar. And thank you, everyone.